This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 23rd of August 2025. I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London, and this is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with Marta Lorimer, a lecturer in politics at Cardiff University. Then,
just looking at people's faces as they try it for the first time, this trepidation as they try it for the first time. Then, hallelujah, the angels descend.
Rahim Kassam of Butterworth's in Washington there on the restaurant's famous bone marrow dish. More about this later in the programme. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First though, here's the news. The hunger crisis in Gaza is at tipping point, with critically low supplies of fortified milk and special nutritious paste exacerbating food shortages and pushing greater numbers of children into starvation, according to aid agencies, malnutrition experts and the United Nations. Almost 2 years since Israel's invasion, famine was formally confirmed for the first time in parts of Gaza on Friday, with almost a quarter of the population facing starvation. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung arrived in Japan today for a summit expected to reaffirm security cooperation between the two East Asian neighbours before Lee meets US President Donald Trump in Washington on Monday. On his first official visit to Japan since taking office in June, Lee will meet Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba at the Premier's residence in Tokyo to discuss bilateral ties, including closer security cooperation with the United States under a trilateral pact signed by their predecessors. And Dutch Foreign Minister Casper Veldkamp, part of a caretaker government, quit his cabinet post on Friday, ahead of schedule over the government's position on Israel's war in Gaza. He said the government did not support additional measures against Israel over Gaza and plans for the occupied West Bank. And a Canadian politician preparing to retire celebrated her time in office by donning 360 neckties at the same time, breaking a Guinness World Record in the process. Mawa Ritzqui, a member of the National Assembly of Quebec, who announced this year she will not seek re-election in 2026, celebrated her tenure in office by attempting a Guinness World Record on the Canadian television series Infoman. It took 48 minutes for Ritzqui to reach the previous record, with her face just barely showing through. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and I'm joined in the studio by Marta Lorimer, who's a lecturer in politics at Cardiff University. Marta, we haven't done this show together before. In fact, this is the first time we've met, so I need to know everything. You're from Italy.
Yes, I am from Italy, but I have lived in the UK at this point for over 10 years, and I proudly acquired British citizenship.
Oh, excellent. Or perhaps not. We'll look at that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Now, you study far-right politics.
Yes, I am a specialist of the far right. I specialise really in France and Italy, but I also have to follow far-right politics in Europe more broadly, and nowadays, unfortunately, also beyond Europe.
So tell me how that came about. What led you to that area of study?
It's a very interesting story. So I was about 18 and I was in a car with some acquaintances, we're going to call them. And one of them had a CD, and that CD was playing neo-fascist music. That's kind of how I discovered that this thing existed. And I sort of progressively got more interested into studying the far right, and I ended up writing a PhD on it. Now, of course, when I started my PhD, this is 2015, I had a sense that I was studying an important phenomenon because it had clear repercussions for democracy and how it functions. But I was still under the impression that I was studying something quite niche. How things have changed.
I mean, you did your PhD on the Italian party that's now in power, which was nothing then.
Yes, exactly. At the time, I clearly remember having an exchange with a senior academic who asked me why it is that I was studying a dead party. Because at the time, I was studying a party that had been, a fairly regular presence in the Italian parliament, this neo-fascist party. But by the time when I was studying them, first of all, they were pretty much dead. They'd been reformed as a party that was polling at 3%. A said party is now in government. So again, it goes to show that there is some worth in studying history and studying dead things, because you never know when they're going to come back.
Well, and I mean, to your point, look at the world today. I don't know, can we call the US a fascist nation yet, or is it just creeping authoritarianism? I
think we can, let's stick to authoritarianism for now. I don't even know that we can call it creeping anymore. There is still some counterpowers remaining, of course, in the United States, so we're not at fully fledged authoritarianism, but that certainly seems to be the direction of travel.
Well, let's look at the latest coming out of there, and that's the investigation of John Bolton. So lots and lots of pieces about this in all of the papers today. He was, of course, the ex-national security advisor to Trump. He is now a big Trump critic. He's fifth in a list of 60 to have been investigated in the last 7 months. Tell us about this list.
Well, yes, apparently this is a list that appears in a book of a prominent Trump, not prominent Trump supporter, but is it the current...
Kash Patel.
Yeah, exactly, Kash Patel, so the FBI
yeah.
director, who wrote a book that was very critical against all of these enemies of Trump and I suppose the deep state is probably what they would call it. And there's a list at the end of this book of 60 people. And rather curiously at this point, 5 of those 60 people have been investigated. So if I was the other 55, I'd probably be watching my back right now, because they're probably coming up next.
I mean, Trump's reaction to the Bolton investigation, this is according to The Guardian, says they say it undermines claims of prosecutorial independence. Asked about the raids, the president claimed ignorance. Whilst launching familiar attacks, Bolton was sort of a lowlife and could be a very unpatriotic guy. We're going to find out, he said.
Yes, it's very well known that being unpatriotic should absolutely get the FBI on your house. This is not...
It's not just the US, of course. It's here in Britain too, and we're seeing this more and more, particularly around asylum hotels. Now, these are hotels that the government rents or takes over in order to house asylum seekers. And what we've seen recently is protests outside these hotels by far-right groups here.
Yes, but what we're seeing more broadly, I think, it's the far right is becoming normalized, and they're becoming increasingly emboldened, because the moment you have people in power that are saying things that would have been considered, let's face it, about really beyond the pale. And I'm not talking about 10 years ago. I'm talking about 5 years ago. A lot of the discourse around migration would have been considered sort of broadly unacceptable. Then you see these groups being emboldened and then starting to... I would say to organize. Part of the problem is that it's not really something that is centrally organized. A lot of this is sort of individual protests taking part. And a real part of the issue is also the coverage that these things get. Because, of course, the protests at these migration hotels are something that is concerning, because, of course, you have people who are being housed in these hotels who are probably extremely scared by what is happening. And the coverage that this is getting would suggest that what we are seeing is swathes of people with legitimate concerns around migration. The reality of it is that these are very small demonstrations. That doesn't make them any less dangerous or any less scary, but they are being used to spin a narrative around the fact that local people have legitimate grievances and legitimate concerns around migration and asylum seeking, and that we should be listening to these legitimate grievances. And of course, the problem there is that what is it that gets to count as a legitimate grievance? Why is it that this is what we are treating as a legitimate concern when, I mean, there are a lot of other ways to deal with migration here. And one of them is to point out that one of the reasons you have to house these people in hotels is because there's no other place to keep them, because there is a major backlog in terms of what the UK is sort of handling these cases. And that probably that if you dealt with that, this phenomenon would not actually be happening in the way in which we're seeing it play out.
And of course, there are counter demonstrations to stand up to racism as an organisation, which is organising, I think, indeed today there'll be demonstrations and counter demonstrations. Of course, another big demonstration that will happen today is around Gaza, and these people are being arrested for terrorism.
Yes, exactly. This is also something that is going to be. I expect more people to turn up to the rallies in sort of in favour of Gaza and Palestine than will turn up at the migration hotels. But probably they're not the ones that are going to be getting as much coverage, in spite of the fact that they're taking some pretty serious risks going to these protests because, yes, they are going to be arrested under the Terrorism Act.
And that has all sorts of consequences. You can't go into sort of Westminster. You've got to declare it if you go into America or basically anywhere. I mean, it's not a light thing.
No, exactly. It's not. It's again. It's taking some pretty serious risks and protesting against something that is probably at the stage a lot more concerning than asylum seeker hotels.
Absolutely. Well, just back to the far right, because you mentioned neo-fascist music. What is neo-fascist music?
Oh, neo-fascist music is music, just like any form of music, but with neo-fascist themes. So it varies a bit, but there's a lot of genres within it, of course. A lot of it is sort of tending on the punkish sort of oi style, but you also get a lot of folk, of course. And essentially these the ones that I know a little bit better are the Italian bands, and a lot of the times the songs they will sing about how great fascism was. Of course, you will have a glorification of Mussolini, often a glorification of violence. There's this one very famous song by one of these Italian neo-fascist bands called Cinghia Mattanza, which roughly translates to belt carnage. And it's a song where when they play it live at concerts, these people at the concert will take off their belt, start running around in circles and hitting each other with a belt.
Fun Friday night.
Fun Friday night with the neo-fascists. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. And I mean, the songs that I find most interesting or that very much brought me into my research were the ones where they start talking about this very abstract European civilization, which where they'll sing something like, we're European patriots, because what they have in mind, of course, is that Europeans are white peoples and that they're resisting Islam. And that's just what neo-fascists, that's the neo-fascist scene.
Extraordinary. Now, you're a lecturer in Cardiff, right? And there's a right-wing story coming out of Wales.
Yes, this morning in of course my newspapers give me Welsh inspired news, and apparently there is a far-right group that is trying to set up a commune in Wales, in mid-Wales, which is meant to act as a beacon for white people everywhere, showing them that while there is sort of ethnic mixedness and the great replacement taking place, that there is going to be a place in mid-Wales that will be safe for white people to go to and live exclusively amongst white people. Now, the obvious problem that I see emerging with this is that a lot of people won't even be able to pronounce the name of this place.
Well, and another huge problem is it's in mid-Wales. And
it is in mid-Wales. If you know anything about transport in Wales, it's very hard to get to mid-Wales. Because there has been historically underinvestment in rail transport and public transport. So if you have a car... But also
it's in mid-Wales.
And also it's not the best part of Wales. Wales is beautiful. I absolutely recommend going there. Wonderful place. Mid-Wales would not be my first choice of where to go in Wales.
No. So look, when we're talking about sort of neo-fascist music and all the rest of it, neo-fascist food, right-wing food.
This is so it's a really interesting. I actually know someone who works on how the far right uses food in their communication. It's part of they've. I kid you not, the Italian Northern League ran in the EU elections with a part of the campaign that touched on opposing the EU's attempts to get us to eat insects. Okay. And they're not the only one who politicized food in this way. There was, I think, in France a few years ago, a wild story about couscous and how couscous was obviously the food of foreigners and we should not be eating it. So the far right is trying to forge this connection between themselves as common people, as people of common sense that respect tradition, all the controversies around eating pork and serving pork in canteens, including apparently having to find safe spaces to eat because I think it was there's a story about Tommy Robinson being kicked out of a restaurant because people were not comfortable with him being there. So it looks like they also need their own restaurants nowadays.
Extraordinary. Well, here in Britain, it's Boysdale in London, isn't it? Nigel Farage's favourite restaurant, or perhaps the Carlton Club, which was the original home of the Conservative Party. But in Washington, food and politics are never far apart. Butterworth's, a new bistro near Capitol Hill, has quickly gained a reputation not just for its adventurous menu, but for its clientele. It's backed by Raheem Kassam, a far-right activist and media figure. The restaurant's become a favoured haunt of the Maga movement. Yet, at its helm is chef Bart Hutchins. He's a champion of sustainable nose-to-tail cooking, more often associated with the political left. So the result is an unlikely meeting point in a deeply divided city. Well, Monocle's Charlotte McDonald-Gibson went to Butterworth's to hear more.
If a Democrat and a Republican were to walk into a restaurant together in deeply polarised Washington, chances are there would be a few expectations about what the other would eat. For the Republican, a slab of red meat, preferably steak from Texas, or maybe a cheeseburger with all the sides washed down with a Diet Coke. For their Democratic companion, maybe something vegan, organic, definitely sustainable, accompanied by a nice glass of natural wine. These are the stereotypes that Chef Bart Hutchins, a veteran of DC kitchens, has been trying to upend. A disciple of the nose-to-tail, farm-to-table eating movement, he has been disappointed in the past at suspicion in some political quarters of sustainable dining pioneers like his hero, California restaurateur Alice Waters.
The problem for Alice is that Alice is sort of like a known liberal, like worked in the Obama White House, is not trusted by a certain large majority of the country. If we're going to move away from chicken strips, if we're going to move away from sort of seed oils, if we're going to move away from all these things that are poisoning us, you can't just win half the country.
Now he has his chance. Hutchins is head chef at the most talked about new restaurant in DC. But it's not the food that's garnering most of the attention. It's the clientele. Butterworth's, a bistro just around the corner from the US Capitol, opened in October and swiftly became known as the hangout of choice for members of Trump's Make America Great Again movement. This is largely down to the social ties of one gregarious investor, Raheem Kassam. A veteran of the conservative movement on both sides of the Atlantic, Kassam set up the UK version of Steve Bannon's Breitbart News before moving to the US to launch his own conservative news outlet, the National Pulse. When he got on board at Butterworth's, Kassam's old pal Bannon, seen as the godfather of the MAGA movement, started propping up a corner table. And others in the movement soon followed. Butterworth's client list is now a who's who of power in Washington, welcoming cabinet secretaries like Secretary of State Marco Rubio, lobbyists, journalists, and assorted hangers-on. A self-confessed food snob who carries a tub of caviar in his pocket, Kassam is on a mission to lure this Republican crowd away from their steak and fries.
I remember going to all these parties and things in DC when I first started coming here in 2010. And everything was chicken fingers, and everything was burger sliders and things like that.
He also recalls a different mood in the dining scene during the last Trump administration, when the Republican hangout of choice was the pricey and exclusive BLT Prime Steakhouse in the old Trump International Hotel. Now, a younger conservatives crowd is carving out their own haunts.
The clientele's palate is changing, the clientele's culture is changing, the clientele's growing up a little bit.
The interior of Butterworth's, a shabby chic interior of vintage finds, exudes a mix of French bistro and British gastropub. A soundtrack ranges from 80s hits to French electropop. The menu is adventurous and eclectic, with a focus on good quality ingredients with a twist.
If you want something hearty, the merguez over the pomme puree is definitely going to give you a nostalgic vibe, make you think you're at your grandmother's house. The lamb tartare is iconic for us. The bone marrow is delicious. It's a little twist on bone luge with escargot on top.
Both Hutchins and Kassam single out the bone marrow escargot dish as one they like to propose to curious diners.
I love to, this sounds really weird, I love to watch people from across the room when it's their first time having it. People will come in and they'll say, oh, what should I have? And they'll point to the Caesar salad, or they'll point to the pork Milanese, and I'll say, well, how adventurous are you really feeling? You know, have you had this? Have you had escargot? Have you had bone marrow? And I always say to them, if you don't like it, I'll pick it up for you. You know, I'll this one's on me. I've never had to do it. And it just looking at people's faces as they try it for the first time, this trepidation, as they try it for the first time. Then, you know, hallelujah, the angels descend, and they think, where have you been all my life?
The dish has become so popular, says Hutchins, that they've caused a bone marrow shortage in DC. They still get asked for cheeseburgers, he adds, and did concede with a special for National Hamburger Day recently.
Even then, 20% of the grind was beef heart, just to make it more of interest.
Well, Butterworth's gets its column inches because of its popularity with the Maga crowd. Kassam says it attracts a bipartisan clientele, estimating a 50-50 mix from both sides of the aisle, which makes it something of a rare beast in today's Washington, where there seems to be little common ground between the town's Democrats and Republicans. And that is exactly why Hutchins hopes Butterworth's will go down in history.
There's this great tradition of DC restaurants that had a high-profile clientele, right? So if you look back in history, the Monocle, which is not far from here, was Nixon's favorite restaurant. So there was a time when it was like the Nixon restaurant. There was an old French restaurant in the 70s called Sans Souci that was sort of Reagan's favorite restaurant. They have a really funny story about having to kick Mick Jagger out because he didn't wear a coat to the restaurant, a proper jacket to the restaurant. So to go down in the book, in my mind, to go down sort of in the books as like a great DC restaurant, you have to have the clientele that run this city, and it is a company town. It's the politics town, and it's sort of always been striving for that. But that just is easier said than done. And so when that started to happen here, and you know, all the cabinet secretaries and all the big political figures, it felt like something really different. Not just like the cool restaurant that's going to get this magazine write-up or win this award, but one of those ones that could be here 40, 50, 60, 100 years.
And for that reason, he was resigned to the clientele getting more attention than his daring and delectable plates.
Charlotte McDonald-Gibson there. Well, I haven't been to Butterworth, but it sounds like it's worth the trip for the food, if not the people watching.
Yes, why not? I'm always up for going to the favourite haunts of the far right. I used to, I've been to several of these sort of far right bookshops. And it's always a very interesting experience because you see a selection of books that you're not going to see anywhere else. Yeah. And, you know, at least here I get to eat if I go to this restaurant.
But I mean, one of the things about the far right, and particularly, I suppose, in bookshops, is that it does seem to be largely, or in some part, centred on conspiracy theories.
Yes, there's a huge amount of that, of course. I mean, we've... It's become, you know, conspiracy theories are nothing new. What, of course, is somewhat new with the internet is the kind of the spread that they can achieve, and also increasingly how quickly they can then get into the mainstream. This, of course, we've seen this very clearly last year in the UK with the riots. And how those were very much started by conspiracy theories online. Currently, French President Emmanuel Macron is battling one of these himself because a rumour started spreading a little while ago that Brigitte Macron was in fact a man, was born a man. She was apparently born her brother, precisely. And the problem with this is that this doesn't really stay contained to France. This has been picked up by Candace Owens, the far-right commentator. And so essentially what Macron and his wife have ended up doing is they're suing for defamation. But the problem is that it's very, very difficult to fight against these conspiracy theories because they're just, once they've become widespread, once they've been heard, it's it's very difficult to persuade people that this is not true.
I mean, there's a big piece about this in Le Monde today, isn't there? And just why he would bother to do this.
Well, this is. I mean, partially it's because Brigitte Macron insists that she is fighting online bullying, but I think for him it's really important, I suppose, to try and bring reality back on track. One of the big issues that I think we're facing is that reality seems to have become, or, the truth of some sort, seems to have become a very abstract thing. It's the kind of thing that you can mobilize for political resources. No one cares anymore if something is true or not. Someone cares about whether this is going to serve your political argument or not. And this is something that I think they're really trying to resist against. So one of the reasons this ended up being talked about is, well, partially because it's August, so there's not much going on. But it's also quite unprecedented that you would have the president of France sort of going in with a defamation suit along with his wife, because this sort of has repercussions for him.
Yeah, and of course, Michelle Obama's been subject to the same. I mean, any strong woman, she can't possibly be a real woman. She must really be a bloke.
No, exactly. I was just this morning, I was going through my Instagram feed, and someone who I barely know, these kind of side acquaintances that you've met at one point and then keep following them for whatever reason, posted something from an account. And because the account had a name that sounded pretty right-wing, I decided to go and see what else they were posting. And they were posting a story. They posted a story about how Barack Obama was a queer who had married a man who dresses as a woman. And again, this stuff then gets people hear about these things and they start talking about them as if they are real. Because, of course, you cannot possibly be a woman who's a strong-willed woman and very well educated and married to sort of, the former president of the United States and be a woman.
It's insane. It's insane. Now, because, of course, your line of work, as you say, you follow these accounts on social media. So that must, but your phone, for instance, being checked at a border must be fascinating. People think you're, a fascist.
Yeah, I have had this problem. I have never had a problem myself, right? But certainly my YouTube algorithm has become quite... There was a phase where I was listening to a lot of this neo-fascist music and that my algorithm got pretty messed up. I'm quite lucky. I'm lucky in a way that I mostly focus on far-right parties, less so movements. Movements are something that I sort of follow in an adjacent way and mostly via the research of others, which means that I'm not quite as exposed to a lot of these things. My Instagram feed is still happily trying to sell me unkillable plants. But I think that this is for researchers that particularly work on the far right online. This is a problem. It's not what's going to stop them getting into the US. In fact, it might get the red carpet rolled out for them. But it is certainly something that you have to be very aware of as a researcher, how your safety comes into it.
You're about to go off on your travels very soon. Where are you off to?
I am off to Thessaloniki for the ECPR General Conference. So this is a big consortium for political research. And this year, the annual conference is just happens to be in Greece, which is very exciting, but I'm not looking forward to the 3.5-hour flight, which is just a little bit too long because it's not long enough to be long haul, but it's just too long for short haul.
Yeah, well, you've got to hope that all the staff on board are in their right minds. Great story today in The Guardian about a BA flight attendant.
Yes, this is my new favourite genre of flight attendants that are either drunk or high as a kite. This specific story involved a flight attendant who was found naked, very, very high, in the bathroom of the plane, and so sort of had to be taken off duty and put in a spare seat for the rest of the flight.
Extraordinary. And there was another one this week about a drunk flight attendant who'd in fact crashed her car on the way to the airport.
Yes.
Still got on the flight.
This is the logic of I wish I could have been in her mind, in the flight attendant's mind, because the thing is, crashed the car on the way to the airport, abandoned the car and went on to work. This to me is striking in terms of the amount of decisions, the amount of probably not very lucid decisions that had to be taken to get to that point. A lot of it is the adrenaline. After you crash, you have this rush of adrenaline, and the first thing you do is like, yes, I have to get up. But yes, then getting there and being told, yeah, you can't fly because you're drunk. It's not great.
It's really not great. Well, I hope that's not your experience, Marta. Thank you so much for coming in today. That's all for Monocle on Saturday. Many thanks to Marta Lorimer and also to our producer and studio engineer, Faith Eden. Monocle on Saturday will return next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.